So in the group dynamic specific to the survivalist retreat, so earlier video I deal with some faith-based communities, a large successful hippie commune at Harbin Hot Springs, although they may not like being called a hippie commune. It's basically what they grew out from. And the Christian retreat place in Florida was a Christian place, been in I think since the late 70s, early 80s. They're still both of them are still operating long term. The shorter term stuff, I understand Pastor Dowell's group out in Kentucky or Tennessee, they've been around for a little while now, and we could probably consider them successful in managing full-time versus part-time population. And you have to accept the fact that if you want your retreat situation to go to the next level of sustainability, you want the full-time population to be sustainable all of the time, and you can measure the sustainability of a shit hit the fan scenario with your full-time population saying, yes, we can handle this much more people for this amount of time, and we know we can do it. We have sufficient sustainability, we have sufficient supplies, we know we can go from this point to that point. The Christian community that I was a part of for a short time in Florida, what they had was they had supplies in stock. They didn't have any kind of farming activity, but there was a river nearby. And in a pinch, what we figured out is in a lot of the full-time people were expected to go through a survival course that was done on the other side of the river that was undeveloped land. So most of the people had been through a survival course of one type. The other thing they had done was they did a lot of pre-training for missionaries to go overseas with Christian missionary work. So the vast majority of the full-time people have been through a wilderness survival training of one kind or another. Only a very select few specific situation did anything that was to do with security training, but they also had security training, which was a specialized thing. At the Harbin Hot Springs thing, not as much on survival training, but there's a whole lot of the eco-friendly, live in the woods and eat bark and learn what berries do what and all that kind of a thing. Also, some of the heavier investors in some of the solar power companies have been involved in that place, but it is not set up on off-grid capable and maintain everything they have. What they had set up was, if we turned off the power, we could still be emotionally happy and satisfied. But their pools would go cold, the water would stop running. They're not set up for sustainability if they were cut off. But they could last a little while. They had gardens on site. They had positive relationships with some farmers and stuff like that. And they weren't so far into the grass-eating hippie side that they were total vegetarians. So, if there were farmers nearby with cattle, they could make a deal. They could probably muddle along. With a survival retreat situation, what I'm looking at is for the types of people that we have, for the types of people that we generally want to look for, it's a 10-to-1 ratio on part-time to full-time, and your transition from part-time to full-time really has a lot to do with the level of commitment that's been demonstrated over an amount of time and meeting what everybody would agree is going to be a sustainable level of you living there full-time, which means that we're able to produce the food or we're able to bring in the money. If it's not a farming-based situation, then I think you really got to look into a year's supply of food for every full-time person. If you've got a family of 4 that wants to live there full-time, that's going to be a lot of stuff. That's going to be a lot of storage space. If you've got part-time people, they're going to have to demonstrate a commitment. Now, with larger established places, they're capable of taking somebody in because they already have the supplies, they already have the infrastructure in place. They're capable of taking somebody in and saying, well, listen, if you work really hard and you show commitment and we feel that you're really part of our program, we're going to take care of you. at least at a subsistence sustainable level. And as they do that, what we're going to do is we're going to see those people maybe rise up and become leaders in that organization. We see that with the military. One of the things that happens with the places that are all ready to go, that are already built, is that's going to also attract, and I hate to say it, the drama and the backstabbers. And people within the military, people at the Christian retreat place, people at the Harbin, at the New Ager place, they all had stories to tell about internal politics and backstabbing. But one of the things that I noticed when I went to the places that were a little bit less successful, the least successful it is, and the more closer they were to desperation, the less talk there was about backstabbing, because people weren't necessarily stakeholders in it so deeply that they couldn't just remain mobile. You know, there was a group of people, they get together, 5 people, they rented a house together, they started doing it. Whatever reasons, the personalities didn't work out among them, or the resources didn't work out of them, or they couldn't make money out in the middle of nowhere. And because they weren't really deep stakeholders in it, there wasn't much there to fight over, they just went their separate ways. And in some ways, we're going to say that's no harm, no foul. In other ways, we're going to say, okay, well, that was a failed community. On the other hand, it's a learning experience. And it's one of the reasons why, having participated in some that were successful, others that were failed, others where they were successful, but I didn't fit in their particular program, then I would say you want to maintain mobility. But across the board, generally, you've got the full-time people, you get the part-time people, and you got the people who kind of showed up in desperation. In every respect, what you're going to do better with is, what are you bringing to the table? Are you bringing more to the table? It's not just your table, but the communal table. And that is going to play a bigger role in how well you're going to do in a situation compared to, you know, maybe somebody who knows a lot or somebody who talks the party line. And it was interesting as I studied and looked at both groups, there were people that were a little bit parasitic who would show up, really emphatically talk the party line, all of the loves, all of the hatreds, all of the judgments, really good at talking the party line, but they weren't necessarily bringing something to the table. And the lower echelons among those all had that figured out. They knew, okay, here's somebody coming along, talking the line, but we got dishes to do. Here's somebody who's coming along and they're preaching this and they're preaching that, and they left cigarette butts in the driveway. Somebody's talking and preaching this, and that, and they used up the gas out of our storage thing. That's actually was pretty consistent across the board. Now, I will say this, all these groups were in the United States. What little I've studied about Gandhi, though, in the ashrams in India, a lot of times they kind of dealt with that too. And one of the things they dealt with in India were followers of Gandhi who had come from the upper echelons of Indian society and didn't want to do the work of the untouchables. They felt that, well, I'm going to follow Gandhi in the ashram, but I'm going to be in management because that's the social caste that I come from, and we're all going to be in brotherhood, but, you know, the lower people are going to be the ones that clean toilets. Come on now. And Gandhi, of course, would admonish him and said, no, we have to have more equality. Higher people, lower people, you clean your own toilet. And that was kind of an interesting thing because the New Age group was largely based on a lot of Indian-type beliefs, but when it came time to divvy up chores, boy, there was a lot of fighting over who was more or less spiritually enlightened when it came to cleaning toilets. At the Christian place, they were actually doing a little bit more in tune with what Gandhi would teach than sometimes at the other places, at the New Ager places. So it really depends. I mean, you know, self-serving hypocrites are going to be found everywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to revisit the part-time versus full-time dynamic in a later video. But to sum this up, I think you're going to need about a 10-to-1 ratio for full-time to part-time people. Very specific to the survival group thing, you need to be ready for the refugees. You need to be ready for the full-time people coming in and being, the part-time people showing up. Shit's hit the fan, the part-time people are going to be there. Okay? If they feel they are not going to be welcome, they're not going to want to participate from the get-go. So it needs to be very clear that if you're a part-time person and shit's hit the fan, you will be welcome if you have been accepted as a part-time person and if the shit hits the fan. If we're looking at all day, every day, ongoing life at the place, and it may be a desirable place for these people to live at, depending on their lifestyle desires and their needs and all of that, we're going to have a higher level of requirements. And that's kind of your little backdoor exit thing when it comes to the survival group dynamic, is that you could also say, listen, man, the shit's not hit the fan, so no, we're not going to move you over to full-time unless you have brought enough to the table, or we have enough at the table that it's not a drain on resources, that we're adding to the pool here on net value. And I think we're going to discuss that in the next video here, and I'm going to switch cameras for that.